Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great afternoon or whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Those of us at TND World are excited to bring you this new webinar entitled Developing Business Models for Underground at National Grid. This webinar is about innovative work going on with major utilities, and it is sponsored by National Grid Partners and the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative, or PDI Squared. My name is Rod Walton. I'm managing editor of Microgrid Knowledge and EnergyTech.com, which work together with T&D World as part of Endeavor Business Media. And I'll be doing the introductions and closing for today's event. So this is about a progressive program to develop a variety of business models for undergrounding electric distribution systems and reducing costs while doing so. You'll hear firsthand from Nick Rancis, who is Senior Manager, Innovation and Venture Acceleration with National Grid Partners Innovation Team. And joining Nick is moderator Mike Beeler, who is National Spokesperson with the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative. Before I turn it over to our speakers, though, let me share a few housekeeping items that will help you participate in today's presentation in the most seamless way possible. First, if you're having any technical difficulties during today's session, and hopefully you can hear me, just look for the question icon on the left rail of the platform, click it, submit your problem into that window, and our technical expert will help you out. We also recommend that you disable any pop-up blocking software or extensions to your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. Additionally, we welcome your questions during today's event. Mike and Nick will answer as many as they can during the Q&A session that either follows the presentation, and some may come up during the presentation. But please feel free to send yours in at any time. To do so, just find that question icon on your screen and hit submit. Also be aware that our session today is being recorded and will be available on the T&D World website within the next 24 hours at tdworld.com. And you'll be notified by email when that archive is available. To refer a colleague to today's discussion, to share it on social media or any of that, just click the icons that are available on your left side of the rail, and we appreciate it when you do that. And it just increases the circulations of important contributions like these from National Grid Partners and PDI Squared. So that's all I've got for now. I'm going to turn it over to the main event with Mike Beeler of PDI Squared and Nick Rancis of National Grid Partners. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Rod. Really appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here with National Grid, and they've got some really progressive things that we're going to share with you today. Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative is a group of contractors and consultants and manufacturers and vendors in the underground community that advocate for an evaluation of overhead versus underground, looking at the total cost of ownership over the life of the asset. We try to be a resource for planners and engineers and even data scientists across the industry, so they've got a great place to go to get more information about underground and the value of underground. Today, we're really excited to share what I think is one of the most progressive utilities in America with regard to some of the things they're doing on their underground system and things they're looking at going forward. So our guest speaker is Nick Rancis. Nick, just a quick hello so people can hear your voice and hear who you are.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time, to join this call. And I am excited to share, a lot of the works that we've been doing behind the curtain. Mike, should I take it from here?
Well, I'll tell you what. I just will tell everybody to feel free to send in your questions. We might ask questions as we go. We're going to try to keep a conversation going about this. We'll get to about the last 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll take any questions that remain. But it's a great opportunity to listen carefully to what National Grid is planning, and I think you're going to be really intrigued by this. So yeah, go ahead and take it away, Nick, and tell us what you're doing at National Grid.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And thanks to the T&D World as well. What I wanted to share today is a little bit more about the platform that we build from, which is National Grid Partners, as well as the work we're doing in undergrounding business model development. My name is Nick Rancis. I'm a senior manager at within the Innovation and Venture Acceleration team at National Grid Partners. I think to myself, 20 years ago, would I be working at a utility designing new companies and business models that can be used by the utility and the utility industry? And I think this answer is probably not. But the first half of my career, I've been mostly working in the energy space in small companies. I've founded a company back in Colorado and now live here in Boston, supporting National Grid. The overview, what I'll share today is essentially a unique function, not being National Grid Partners, the unique function both from a investment but also a venture creation and innovation platform. So National Grid Partners was essentially created in 2018 as a corporate venture capital and innovation fund. Right out of the gate, we secured funding from our limited partner, National Grid, but essentially operate as our own function within the unregulated part of the utility. There's many things that we've done over the years, but notably we've enjoyed a large portfolio of companies from an investment perspective, but also a variety of different transformational innovation projects and programs aimed at really creating that stepwise function change within the utility industry. We like to joke that we say we want to invent the utility from the inside out, and National Grid Partners is definitely the mechanism at which to do so. And the message is clear, right? I think this slide probably resonates with various groups across the globe. But in order to decarbonize our sector, the power sector itself requires a massive investment, not only by the industry itself, but National Grid. I think we're on a trajectory to essentially build out our network of a 4x in the next 5-10 years to really support the decarbonization and grid of tomorrow. And regardless, whether gas or electric, and what we want to do is make sure that it's a digital, decentralized, and distributed mechanisms to support efficiencies, but also new technologies. So, and what that means is we have strong top-down support. This is a quote from our CEO, John Pettigrew, that really is a prime supporter of National Grid Partners in order to truly future-proof ourselves, but not only from a technology and business model perspective, but also to create the entrepreneurial culture within National Grid. There is, I think the utility industry is ripe for innovation, and in general, it's a very exciting place to be that transition entity that brings both new solutions to the table, but also a scaling function that scales new technologies not only within the walls of National Grid, but the utility industry broadly. So I think it's important to level set all the different key functions we do within National Grid Partners in particular. And we've essentially created this nice flywheel effect where the outputs of our efforts feed into the efforts. And yes, looks like I am hitting the next one.
Yeah, Nick,
okay.
There you go. You got to push that next button.
There we go.
Get us going to the right places.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, Deb, and Mike. So again, the investment is apparent, and I don't think this is new to the industry. But National Grid essentially is also keen on the large amount of network build-out that's needed to occur. And again, I mentioned we have top-down support from the organization, from the CEO down. And so by being able to have air cover and the ability to have capital access allows us to operate on a different time scale, that of an entrepreneur, to help essentially reinvent the utility from the inside out. So this is the slide I needed to backtrack from, but essentially, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we operationalize ourselves at National Grid Partners. We have three unique functions that operate as a flywheel where the output of one function is essentially the input of another. And working with the different functions across the org, can we deliver the value, not just say we're delivering the value. At the top, we have our investment function, and our team of corporate venture capital investors operate very similarly to a variety of other different CVC functions, but really are keen on the technologies and businesses that essentially can not only address national grids problem, but the industry broadly and even globally for that matter. So we do make startup investments. We have a nice portfolio ranging from digital technologies to hardware technologies, and not only positioned to create a financial return for the organization, but be that strategic component as well. Moving around to the right, we have a business development function, which is a team of individuals that supports the output from both innovation and investing, essentially looking for opportunities within the business, so the business itself can be the first customer. We not only want to provide capital, but be that strategic partner for the startups and be able to place startups within the organization itself to not only support return for National Grid from a strategic benefit, but also from an equity and revenue perspective for our portfolio companies. And so
Nick,
the business
let me
development
interject
team.
a question here.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to interject a quick question here. So why did you guys decide to do this on your own as opposed to going and joining somebody like Energy Impact Partners or something? And did you see models from other utilities that you liked, or something you saw, in the UK, for example, that you liked? Why are you doing this on your own?
Well, I think, so we are part of EIP, and we are actually a limited partner of a number of other funds. But what we saw is a unique advantage within the market to driving it ourselves, because we also believe that we want to be the first customer and have that strategic value. And by doing so, where we only have to answer to ourselves, gives us a great deal of control and ability to address those problems directly versus through another organization.
Control is the key. Yeah. Good answer.
Yeah. And lastly on the pinwheel is the innovation and venture acceleration, function within National Grid Partners. And this is where I sit, and really looking at within the business for specific, basically, problems to solve, broadly stated, and I'll get into that in a minute. But really looking to, develop the products and technologies and businesses of tomorrow. And really looking on a 10 to 20 year time horizon. So as opposed to our investing in business development partners that are looking in the short to medium term, the innovation and venture acceleration team truly looks long term and really markets not that are $1 million markets, but $1 billion markets. We take a risk here where we essentially, if we see a world of tomorrow where certain scenarios exist within the utility or utility sector, and no product or startup is addressing that problem or scenario, we'll essentially create it ourselves and really stand up something and test it internally with the intention to scale it not only within the national grid, but the market broadly. And so we function and we operate as what we call it creativity on a schedule, where we operationalize ourselves and in a very rigorous and disciplined manner to make sure that we can address the right problems, categorize the right problems, and bring those solutions back to ourselves with the core business. We also operate in innovation and venture acceleration. Also operates National Grid Partners. The Next Grid Alliance, which is the industry consortium of utilities that meet annually to essentially work through each other's problems, share technology, and portfolios of solutions broadly. So more on that in a little bit. I think just in general, these are some of the numbers that we typically do from an investment perspective. And so we have roughly 49 startups within our portfolio, and have made 110 investments across the board. It's a rigorous, essentially, a portfolio that we operate from a funnel perspective. But to date, we've invested a little over $500 million into our portfolio. And from the innovation perspective, we've launched and scaled about 20 different innovation projects.
Hey, Nick, we got a pretty varied audience here on this webinar. Some are relatively new to the industry and maybe even just new to business in general. Tell us what a unicorn is, and can you tell us maybe what a couple of examples of the unicorns were in amongst these 49 startups that you had?
Yeah. So a unicorn, broadly stated, is a startup that has a valuation of over $1 billion. And so this is, in the, venture capital and innovation industry, this is essentially the gold standard of startup success. And, it can be a variety of different companies. But typically, because we all like to measure ourselves and the industry broadly, a unicorn is a company that has that valuation of over $1 billion. For the actual companies, we'll make sure to put the website of National Grid Partners at the back of the deck that highlights those individual unicorns themselves. They all have a really nice story to tell.
Great, thank you.
And so, I think it's important to highlight, how we operationalize ourselves before we, get into the undergrounding effort, because I think it will really demonstrate, the outcomes anticipated from the undergrounding work we are doing. I would say, on a given day, 8 out of 10 of my brain cells are focused on the business problem to be solved. And we spend our team, we focus our efforts really working with the business units, and that's what BU is, on clearly defining and articulating the problem. Not only in kind of the strategic magnitude, but the financial opportunity of solving said problem, right? And then by being able to bring in new concepts through the innovation team, but also new startups, we can bring in those new solutions. And so by either investing in a solution, innovating a solution from the ground up, or partnering with early stage technologies strategically, we can look to deliver that solution. Identifying the solution and creating the solution actually is very easy, and that's, I would say, the remainder of my 10 brain cells are on the solutioning end. Given that we've all aligned both internally but also within the business units themselves on the problem that we look to solve.
I'll just interject. There was a question that just came in about R&D, and so some utilities, regulated utilities, have R&D, and certainly some are involved in the Electric Power Research Institute. This is well beyond what you would do in traditional R&D, or I think Public Power's got the DEED program. Do you want to comment on Public Power's DEED program and R&D within a regulated environment and EPRI, and why this is the better way to go?
Yeah, and maybe I'll preface it's not the better way to go, as we work closely with these other organizations like EPRI and a lot of other startup incubators and accelerators across the country. In many cases, the level of synergy that can be developed by working with these partners is great. And so we work with all sorts of incubators and accelerators across the country from a startup, deal flow perspective, or helping us identify those right solutions that they might have in their portfolio. And so we work closely with those groups. On the R&D side, and very similarly, R&D it really will vary between companies, and it really depends on the end goal at which the early stage or risky development looks to develop over time. I think one thing that we do well and are always striving to do better is scaling, innovation. And I put on the left here, we prioritize our portfolio. Just because we invest in a startup doesn't necessarily mean we can scale it. Just because we create a project that solves a specific problem in the innovation side doesn't necessarily mean it can be scaled. And so we want to prioritize those that can be scaled. And when I say that, it really is from the whiteboard to the rate case. And by being able to claim success that not only and pave the way, right, for other utilities as well, we definitely want to be first, and we definitely want to take that risk on, with the intent to scale it, which for those that have worked or work within the utility construct is a very, very difficult feat to accomplish, regulated or unregulated utilities. So what I wanted to highlight here is really just how we operationalize ourselves within the innovation team, right, which is the subsection of National Grid Partners. We have our innovation lab that essentially looks at top of the pipe ideas, which then the good ones or the prioritized ones move into our commercialization team that look to not only scale it internally but externally as well. And so we've got a robust pipeline that basically goes from left to right, from the innovation lab to the commercialization group. We also have an innovation management office that really coordinates both the innovation activities within our group, but also across the organization, really looking to be the most efficient way to make sure there's not any duplication, or we want to make sure that we can benchmark ourselves and report up accordingly. And the last piece we have is the Next Grid Alliance, which is an ecosystem of other like-minded utilities that can work together on identifying problems and solutions together. If folks are interested in come from the utility space and haven't heard of Next Grid Alliance, I'd be more than happy to connect you with the folks there. It's a great team. I think we have over 140 different utilities that are part of our organization.
Wow, that's a lot.
So I think what I want to do is start to lead into undergrounding as part of one of the innovation campaigns that we're working on. This is essentially our current pipeline of innovation work, and of which some are earlier in the pipeline, like undergrounding, and some are actually scaling on the back end. So working backwards, we're doing some efforts in modular substation development, really looking to standardize a lot of the substations, especially as we look towards a large pipeline of capital delivery over the next 5-10 years. And then secondly is a integrated energy planning tool that allows our gas and electric teams to work seamlessly together as they look for non-pipe alternatives, and not only weighing the engineering benefits, but also the cost benefits as well, as we look to transition to a more electrified grid without asset redundancy, stranded assets, and duplication within the gas network as well. We also are doing some work in large loads. I think data centers typically take center stage, but they're not the only large load. And so what we want to do is essentially holistically look how those large loads connect to our grid, which are very different than solar or wind, and make sure that we can really accelerate that interconnection time and improve those customer outcomes as they are what we would call, quote, hyperscalers in that effect. And the last piece is the innovation work in undergrounding, which I'm going to cover a little more in depth. Right now, undergrounding is very expensive. I don't think that's news to anyone, to where generally the option to go overhead is preferred, even with long-term maintenance concerns. And so undergrounding, just from a construction first cost perspective, is generally not looked upon as favorably in a variety of places. And so what we want to do is make sure we can pave the pathway through business model innovation, not necessarily technological innovation, although that plays a part, but being able to create first-of-a-kind business models that pave the way to reduce first costs of undergrounding. So I'll pause there. Mike, is there any questions before I move on? I always want to make sure that I can at least create a
No,
point.
I think you've done a really nice job giving us the background on it. And you got me hanging on the edge of my seat here, waiting for a business model. I let your comment go about the cost of underground. So I'm interested in not technical solutions, you said, but business model solutions for bringing down the cost of underground. So let's keep on going, Nick. It's very interesting.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. All right. So I think I would imagine that many folks on the call are, if not more, intimate with the undergrounding market and the need for undergrounding of our infrastructure. Not only are natural disasters, the quantity and strength moving up and to the right, but high winds and falling trees and rogue squirrels wreak havoc on overhead networks. Not only that, we look at these larger magnitude storms like hurricanes or Superstorm Sandy, as we like to call it, left a large part of our network offline for weeks. So not only are we facing those types of growing threats, but there is also losses in societal productivity. And this is, essentially kind of the softer end of resiliency is the economic damage that's caused by power outages, not in lost revenue to National Grid, but to the customers of National Grid. And there's a variety of different studies that, notably some from LBNL, that put this number at an annual figure of 150 billion of annual productivity losses in the U.S. specifically due to power outages. When we look at that number for National Grid, we estimate that as roughly 5 billion per year in New York and Massachusetts. And by and large, the large majority of those losses are from larger events. And so
right, there we go to the definition of resiliency. Then, as we talk about the resiliency is the ability to withstand a high impact but low probability event with little or no outage. And so, if 83% of your major losses come from these major storms, and you start to quantify that number in like lost GDP or gross domestic product for your region that gets impacted, that's significant. Down in Florida, they've said on the tip of Florida in Miami, if Miami is out, it's $1 billion a day of lost productivity or GDP, if you will. So the question is how do we, and this is what I think you're going to get to with these business model solutions, is how do we as an industry quantify that? What does Entergy say? What does CenterPoint Energy say? They have these same hurricanes, Cat 5 hurricanes, come through and wipe out their transmission system, take their system out for weeks at a time. They put it back up pretty much the way it came down. And here comes another storm and it does the exact same thing. Well, how many more times are you going to do that? And when are you going to get to the point where you're going to quantify it and say, no, we're simply not going to do that anymore? Yep, the capital cost might be higher, but when you look at the cost to society over time, it just exceeds what we're willing to put up with.
That's right.
Got a little bit of a hot button on that for me, Nick. That is something I'm pretty passionate about.
Yeah, and myself as well, right? And when we think about undergrounding, it really is a tool in a toolbox, but a very effective tool for that resiliency efforts. And there's no shortages of ways that happens. All right, I mean a lot of it is from stuff falling down on lines, from trees to branches to those rogue squirrels. Here, I think there's definitely an opportunity for not only a more resilient grid, but a faster mechanism for the energy transition. And so, although they can, alleviate some of those biggest friction points, the cost battle is one that we look to address promptly. So the goal of our innovation effort, as we set forward, and kind of our North Star, is to use new technologies and new business models together to reduce those first costs. Not only that, we want to make sure that we can revalue, or in some cases value financially, the total cost of ownership of undergrounding. I know, Mike, this is something that you harp on as well. Total cost of ownership is somewhat of an enigma within the utility space. And given that some of these assets, you have a book life of 50 years, but in many cases will be pushed well beyond that. Making sure that we can lower that total cost of ownership as much as we can, while also
Nick,
reaping the benefits as opposed to above ground.
So Nick, so that's a funny thing that you say that it's an enigma in the utility industry, because it's not when we look at other things. For example, and this is a perfect example, electric vehicles. People will say, well, the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle makes tons of sense because, your energy wallet, the spend in your energy wallet is going to go down significantly if you have an electric vehicle. And you need to look at the cost of that electric vehicle, not just the cost of the fuel that's going to go into it / electricity, but the cost of no maintenance and, little wear and tear and et cetera, et cetera. And we're pretty good at evaluating the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles when we want to. Problem is, that side of the business is not talking to your side of the business on underground. And so we let the other people say, well, I'm sorry, no, that capital cost is too high. So we do understand it. We just don't necessarily preach from the same song sheet, sing from the same song sheet. Okay, I'm rambling. Go back.
That's 100% right. And I would say very few utilities actually have a core undergrounding function. National Grid does not, right? As a large utility, we don't have a single source of truth or place within our organization that owns undergrounding. I know PG&E does,
except
and
for
others.
The fact, I will also say, except for the fact that you're a big gas utility too, so you have the ability to underground assets. You have this huge underground asset called your gas distribution system.
That's right. That's right. So look at just quickly going through these charts without having to read them. I say, and a lot of this isn't going to be new news, but be it new underground or converting overhead to underground is always going to be more expensive than new overhead lines. And by being and this is a really important piece of why we want to create business models, is because it's difficult to convince regulators or even ratepayers, for that matter, on spending all this money up front, which is typically the modus operandi of how we capitalize projects. Moving to the graph on the right, this is essentially our goal, right? We using advanced technologies and business models. We want to take that break-even point on the top diamond and shift it down and to the left, essentially decreasing costs in shorter amount of time, to really realize that total cost of ownership advantage faster. So what we look to deliver, not only to the business but to the industry, is actionable business models, and really look to make sure that we can look to our North Star and value that long-term TCO. But more importantly, I challenge the business to say, what would it take, or what would have to be true to 100x the amount of undergrounding deployments in 10 years? And so it's not a reduction in cost by 13.9%. It's how do we increase the quantity and even mileage for that matter, 100x in 10 years. And to do so, we have to start doing that right now, right? And so working with the business, but also different private sector partners, and testing these business models is something that we're doing right now. Underpinning all these different business models that we're creating is a unified cost model. I won't get into the details, but we want to make sure that we can look at each one of these business models, which are all first-of-a-kind models, to make sure that we can look apples to oranges in a very straightforward way. Not only that, we want to make sure that, like any good science experiment, we have a control. And so every one of these business models that we look to essentially institute on a given section of the grid or a line, we want to make sure that they are benchmarked against how we overhead right now and how we underground right now. And so by being able to take each different component and look at it side by side to current operations, we want to make that's a very important consideration when we look to convince the organization that these are all good ideas. And so there's a lot of opportunity, right, in these different types of business models. And Mike, you touched base a little bit on this earlier, but there's right now there's a lot of regulatory pressure and climate pressure within the industry, within our organization, as the regulators truly want commitments towards resiliency, and undergrounding, if done effectively and cost effectively, is a powerful response. Not only that, there's a lot of different technologies that can be essentially scaled within the undergrounding sector. We speak to startups quite frequently that are developing trenchless technologies, that are bringing in subsurface mapping, and those advances in boring and insulation and kind of those components with undergrounding that are required certainly also help bring down those costs. I don't think a lot of this kind of circles around affordability to ratepayers as utility rates keep going up, and so we want to make sure that that's captured as an opportunity. And essentially, what we want to do is, from a grid hardening perspective, reduce outages, and be it from wildfires or storms, and translating that into undergrounding targets for our organization. And with all these different opportunities, it's like, well, okay, why don't we just underground everything? And why are the costs so high? And when we think about either internally, these are some of our challenges. They might and probably are some of the similar challenges that you have seen as well within the undergrounding sector. A lot of it, is just process oriented, and some of it is strategy oriented. The other part being risk aversion. But a lot of these undergrounding programs and projects are one-off, leading to inefficient purchasing of items and outdated cost assumptions. Coupled with that is the lack of data-driven decision-making, meaning a lot of the decisions for undergrounding aren't necessarily scaled across the organization by being able to look at one section of the grid versus the other and prioritize certain sections. It's a very manual process, and essentially the squeaky wheel gets the grease in most undergrounding cases. National Grid, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't have a central undergrounding function like some other utilities do. So a lot of those projects are one-off and don't have that standardization or enjoy economies of scale as they to look to drive down costs even further. And lastly,
let me interject. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead. Well, let me challenge that. So you just said National Grid as an organization, you're kind of fragmented with your underground work, and it's one off. You're doing one here and one there. You're basically a very overhead centric company, like many utilities in America. So you want to evaluate what you think is the accurate cost of underground, but at the end of the day, you're really an overhead-centric company. Most of your engineers, most of your estimators, most of your planners, most of your guys in the field, construction, operation, and maintenance, they're going to give you a construction-related answer relative to an underground answer that they don't know the answer to. Is that fair? I mean, it sounds like that you may be encountering that. And I don't know when you say we're going to try to benchmark our cost today for doing underground against what the future cost of underground is going to be. Well, your cost today for doing underground may not even be close to what it could be because you're not doing some of the basic things that the 21st century engineer does when they design a new progressive. Okay, so expand with that if you want to.
And I think some of that can be cultural, some of it can be just ingrained in the modus operandi of how we operationalize ourselves as a business, but also the risk aversion as well, right? Our job number one is to keep the lights on. And so by deviating away from that, I get it. There is a general aversion towards new technologies. I would challenge also, that general inertia that the organization has, and this is a lot of my role, is really paving the way for those new technologies and new business models to be implemented. And by being able to have that sandbox to play and deploy and scale technologies within, is a good way to prove it, right? When kind of like Missouri, the show me state. We want to make sure that we can show it, not just talk about it.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the business models that we're creating, all of which are still under construction, but I'll kind of walk through some of them here. I think we'll have a lot more to share in a few months, but what I wanted to highlight is many of these different business models that we're developing are typically first of a kind, or done done in other industries. I think an example is monetizing the use of fiber, right? I think, our natural pull partner at National Grid is data, right? And we have large data providers that essentially are partners, or we lease space on our above ground infrastructure. I think a good question to ask is, given that laying fiber in the ground, the incremental cost of doing so is actually very little when you're actually in surgery and putting it underground. That what would have to be true to essentially create a telecom industry or telecom business, and then lease that fiber back to the data companies. There's value in this where it covers some of the upfront costs of undergrounding by being able to create a novel revenue source. I know some utilities do this, but what we were thinking more along the lines is how to do this across our network and bring it as a component of a variety of different business models. Another approach we're looking at is looking at the wastewater treatment sector and how they finance certain assets within the municipality, and so looking at how they quote build, own, operate, and transfer these different assets. There's a lot to learn in there, and we're unpacking those, working with some larger providers there, and figuring out the parallels between the water industry and the electric industry. Those are all very asset-heavy industries, and there's no shortage of firms that essentially provide that build, own, operate model. And lastly, this is not new, but what we're looking at is a level grounding program, meaning in PG&E does some of this out in California, but essentially not overhead and not below ground, but level ground. And if we were to design repeatable products by industry for industry that are maybe pre-casted concrete with conduit inside, or that can snap together, or that can be laid in roads or over rural infrastructure, what would that look like? And how would that device look when snapped together, and by leveraging economies of scale? If you were to bring all those together, what would that solve? And again, my hat's off to PG&E. They're actually a first mover in this industry, looking at essentially covered lines. But we want to take it one space further, and saying, what would have to be true to bring these down a few inches or a few feet underground in a cast manner, where it's more of a drop-in versus a trenching solution. And what we want to do is to be able to take these variety of different business models and be able to test them within the market very, very quickly. But within our team, we have this luxury of being able to not only build the ideas, but we want to make sure that we can get market-based proof with ourselves, but not only that, other utilities as well. And so I'd keep an eye on that as we look towards deploying some of these probably within the next month. And coupled with this, we are developing a tool internally. There we go. A GIS and AI. It's a buzzword here, but this truly is a system that takes a lot of our own data that essentially allows us to prioritize certain areas of the grid for undergrounding. And so by bringing in all sorts of different cost assumptions, cable type and labor rates and material prices, we can start to build a model that basically goes over each line to identify the areas of interest. We bring in different project assumptions, like what is the useful life of this asset or intended? Is it rural or urban? What's the depreciation type and discount rate, right? And all these are all industry or at least apartment-based assumptions. And the last piece is we want to make sure that we can, if we look to create an external company, we want to make sure that it is profitable as well. So with a lot of these projects, how can we play with the debt equity ratio? What about certain interest levels and profit and margin percentages? These are all different assumptions from a finance perspective that we want to add.
Well, Nick,
skip over this.
as we're going to head into some questions here pretty quick. I've got a bunch of comments I could have made on what you just said, but let's go ahead and wrap it up, and then we'll go to some interesting, intriguing questions we got.
Yeah. I think, on this slide, I just want to highlight some of the output of what we want to develop is really just that installed cost per mile or per foot, on a GIS backbone, but also that brings in relevant KPIs from our organization. We want to make sure that we can prove not only the engineering will work, but the finances will work on certain sections. But not only that, there's softer benefits and societal benefits we want to capture as well. And so that's an effort that we're doing internally with a lot of folks focused on resiliency. And so, this cost model and tool that we're developing not only supports the business models, but we want to make sure that we can figure out under which conditions, undergrounding becomes economic, and really start to think about how, using some assumptions from advanced technology developers like subsurface mapping and trenchless drilling technologies, and even HDD for that matter, how does that drive down CapEx? We want to make sure that we can create a long-term business model and look at that total cost of ownership effectively, that not only we can benefit, but maybe other utilities as well. And really use this as a communication tool with regulators and other utilities as we look to, essentially work with these and operationalize them. So I'll close on this slide, Mike, and then, I look forward to the discussion to be had, but, we believe in partnerships, not only with our Next Grid Alliance, but with this project alone. So I think, when we look towards the middle of the summer, we will be piloting some of these business models external to our walls of the organization. So if there's enough interest in co-piloting these models, or even, taking the next step and we can, demo some of these business models at that point, please reach out. We are, going to be hosting a lot of workshops internally, but, I think we'll have some industry workshops as well. And then not only that, we want to make sure that we can, tell the story of what we're doing. So if there's of interest of something else that early in the presentation, we'd be more than happy to connect and dig more deeply. No pun intended. So, Mike, let me hand it back to you. For anything else.
Yeah, so we got some great questions in here. We got about 10 minutes left for questions. So many things to say about this. I would just challenge you that instead of waiting too long to develop a program to prioritize locations for underground, walk down to system operations and tell me the top 10 overhead circuits that are giving you the most trouble right now. And I guarantee you, your system operators in every state already know the answer to that question, and you can start right there.
That's right.
And I think when you jump in and just say, we are going to start undergrounding these troublesome circuits, and we're going to learn, and we're going to use this new technology, and we're going to use technology that is not labor intensive, because that's where your real cost comes. I think you're going to learn a lot. So many questions here. I almost want to go back to the very first one that came in that I thought was really cool, and it has more to do with the overall view of the world as for National Grid partners. But you could relate it to underground. Okay. Are there any breakthrough transmission, or I'll say transmission and distribution technologies, that will enable the massive growth in clean renewable energy, and transition the all-electric future, get this, without traditional wires and towers and structures, that cause major permitting delays? In other words, this person's saying, because you had a pretty good story going there, Nick. This person's saying, hey, what if we do it without wires? What if we do it without poles? You know what? I mean, is there a massive breakthrough that's out there waiting to come? Short answer is no.
Yeah, I think
not immediately, but what do you think about that?
There's some interesting startups that are creating wireless power transmission or distribution. We follow those. We haven't seen one that really sticks out ahead of the crowd. There could be a world like that in the future. I think, if we think about connecting without wires, I like, contactless EV charging, essentially one that you can drive over. I know economics are also challenging in there. But, for the foreseeable future, we will still be using pipes and wires to move, methane and or hydrogen from point A to point B plus and electrons. And our capital delivery is strong, and the amount of construction that's going to be happening in that space is going to be significant over the next 5-10 years. I will say that, in order for those to be the most efficient, there are a variety of different conductoring technologies or dynamic line rating technologies, some of which exist within our portfolio, that increase the efficiency or lifespan of or throughput of a lot of these different, distribution and transmission type systems. So I'm bullish on those.
Yeah.
Less so on wireless transmission, but it might have it someplace in some unique instances.
Maybe way down the road, but your EV charger is a great example. Actually, when you were talking about some of the things going to different roads or intersection segmentations that have precast electrical ducts in roadways or in intersections, that is not that is not a new idea. I mean, people have talked about that. We just haven't, Nick. We just haven't done it because you can't get past a certain place at a utility and they go, what? Why would we do that? When these are innovative, progressive ideas that we should, in fact, do and put into place. Okay, here's a great question from a large public power utility. I can see undergrounding can be justified for areas known to have hurricanes. Can undergrounding be justified for areas that don't have hurricanes based on cost-benefit analysis? So this is a big public power utility on the West Coast that might have had a fire recently. So what do you think about? Can you justify in areas that don't have hurricanes but maybe have other high-impact, low-probability events?
Absolutely. I think, wildfires being one of them, tornadoes being another. I think those come to mind first. There's probably a few others, but absolutely, there's in terms of the natural protection from natural events, undergrounding is very effective.
Okay. Would you another Western IOU? Would you expand on the wastewater treatment plant idea example? And let me just note that your neighboring utility does own a water company. So the fact that we get good at owning gas assets or water assets, or that we're looking to wastewater, that is not that far off for us to be looking at. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's always learnings to be done in other adjacent utilities. And sometimes, we have our head firmly in the sand not to look up enough as an industry, right? To say this group has, or this industry has solved it, or at least addressed it. The primary method of wastewater treatment assets, or not the primary, but one of them is when it's known as the build, own, operate model. Now, there's specific nuanced differences between the utility space and the water space, but essentially by being able to change how financing occurs, how the rate case can be structured, and how the utility would pay back, a financing group, those are all the questions we want to make sure that we can, basically flip on its head. So we're early there. I think, we want to see what the application is of a build, own, operate model for certain jurisdictions, or even the appetite from regulatory. Like, all those are all very much open items for us to address. For every one of these business models, we have a team of both technical, regulatory, procurement, and estimating and permitting. So we'd like to say we have the right people around the table.
Yeah, I think you got a great start. Here's the last, or maybe second to last question. This comes from a developer. This comes from a data center developer. It seems like the barriers to underground revolve around achieving a financially successful regulated utility or unregulated utility model. Can the national labs or EPRI at all develop a model set of utility commission regulations, i.e. that would probably apply across all 50 states, to enable underground? You get that question? Do you think there's a chance that somebody could come along, hey, maybe National Grid, Nick, could come up with a model set of utility commission regulations to enable underground? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the optimist in me says absolutely, right? I think there's a lot, again, that folks can learn from our peers, not only within our state, but, for our neighboring states. Each state is essentially run independently by the state regulator. And so there's a lot of nuances between states that essentially can slow things down, especially, once the contracts actually get laid on the table. So the optimist in me says yes, but I certainly would love to, bring in some regulatory expertise and open-mindedness to that.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if there's one last question here. I had a question I think that I wanted to ask you too. Okay, we've got those. Let's go ahead and take a minute, Nick, to give us some concluding remarks. You've given us a lot to think about, obviously. Give us some concluding remarks today as we wrap this webinar up and go on and challenge me. What do I need to do next? I mean, what do I need to do next?
Yeah, I think, to sum it up, we've essentially thought through this or thinking through this from a total cost of ownership perspective. And by being able to value an asset over the total lifespan of the asset, which is a little bit different than how, a CapEx, organization operates. So, a big challenge of ours is working with the industry to get, and ourselves to, say, is this the right move? And so I think if there's any parting advice, it's always to question, the status of why we do things. What are the codes that are done today that are outdated, that are essentially established 20 years ago? And also, just challenging the basic premises of how and why we underground. When we, look under the cover or open the kimono, there's a lot of just archaic methodologies and ingrained into the inertia of the organization. And just because, my manager did this and his manager did that, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to do it. So I think bringing them, and injecting creativity within respective organizations, and by being able to look at the numbers, and not only that, kind of what would it be like 5, 10, 20 years from now? And that kind of crystal ball thinking is something that we, certainly elevate here.
Well, I'm so glad you said that about the way we've always done it before, or the way that maybe previous generations did it. And that is absolutely categorically not the way to build the 21st century grid. We need to look at the new technologies that we have available today, and we need to deploy them. Even though we're very, very busy spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on this grid, we've got to step up and use some of these new technologies. And shame on anybody that stops a young engineer or planner or data scientists from moving ahead with some new products. You're fortunate, Nick Rancis, to be able to work for National Grid Partners, where you're able to, you have a lot of latitude, and you've got C-suite support to go and do some really interesting and provocative things that I do believe, as we watch you, that you're going to move the needle. We should all ask ourselves, where do I want to be in 5 years? Do I want to be doing the same old stuff I've been doing based on these 1970s and 80s standards, or do I want to be using some of the best technology out there? You know where we got to ask it, Nick? And I'll give you a final comment on this, and then we're going to have to go. We need to ask this in Lahaina. We got to ask it in Puerto Rico before they have another outage on a major holiday, and we need to ask it in the Eaton Fire Zone out in Southern California, where they burned up, a bunch of beautiful country, because it's all got to be rebuilt. And how are we going to rebuild it? So what do you think?
I mean, again, the optimist in me says, a lot of these solutioning, exercises need to be preceded by problem identification. And in the cases of, and proper problem identification, and in the cases of these groups like Lahaina and California, I think a big problem is not getting the right people around the table to really figure out what's important, and working together, constructively over the long run. So I think the problem is generally a human problem and not a technological problem. But I'm optimistic of where we are going in a lot of these ways.
You're the right guy. You're the right guy at the right time at National Grid Partners. Thank you so much for this outstanding webinar today. You're going to be on our panel at T&D Live in September in Phoenix, and that's going to be a really, really cool panel. So, okay, Rod Walton, we have used up all of our time. We'll hand it back to you, Rod. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Nick. What a thoughtful presentation. I mean, looking at the innovation efforts going on in the capital side of what undergrounding lines can mean and do to dramatically improve grid resiliency as all of this extreme weather accelerates, as Mike mentioned and you mentioned. So thank you again. And I'm afraid we have run out of time. I'm just so glad that our audience could join us. This live event has been recorded and will be on demand within about 24 hours. And it will be available for about 6 months after the live event. So please feel welcome to share it with coworkers and friends in the industry at tdworld.com. So that concludes today's presentation on developing business models for underground at National Grid. And thank you so much to our sponsors from National Grid Partners and the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative. Just a great job by Nick Rancis, who is Senior Manager, Innovation and Venture Acceleration with National Grid Partners, and also with Mike Beeler at PDI Squared. It's just fascinating to hear these insights into how to make undergrounding more understood, less costly, and more deployed. So thank you again. Thank you to our audience for your questions. We all learn from each other. And with that, we end our presentation today. I'm Rod Walton, Managing Editor at EnergyTech.com and Microgrid Knowledge on behalf of T&D World. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you on an upcoming webinar in the very near future. And have a great day, everybody.